Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly live stream broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor. I'm co-host of the show with Betsy Cunningham, who dials in from Douglas County. Today, our show is focused on a candidate who ran for Congressional District 19 in New York. His name is Jeff Beals. He was not available to join us today, so we pre-recorded the interview with him earlier in the week. So we're going to play that interview and then have a discussion afterwards. And we're hoping that everyone can share their thoughts on in the chat window as we talk about money in politics and the influence of money on what candidates try to do when they run for office and once they get in office. So Jeff Beals was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And he decided to run for a seat in Congressional District 19 in New York. He was featured on the June 22nd edition of This American Life, where they talked about, in much more depth than we went into in my interview, about the process he went through. And what I found especially interesting in the interview was where it talked about how people with money would come in and they would say, well, yeah, we might be interested in donating to your campaign, but you have to modify the way you talk about or approach these particular issues. And it really showed how money, the lure of large amounts of money corrupts the whole process. So we talked about that, and we talked about money, and we talked about the challenge that he had. Let's show the slide of what he ended up doing. So poor Jeff had 6 opponents in the election. It's in a district that is north of New York City and just skirts Albany. So it's probably a purplish, state. He came in 4th out of the 7 candidates that ran, and the margins between the candidates was not that great. And in total there were something like 34,000 votes cast, and the top getter got 7,600. Jeff ended up with 4,600, and as he says in the interview, he just didn't have enough runway to launch his campaign because things were picking up, but not fast enough for the campaign. The spending was, of course, astronomical. If you show the spending slide, John, the incumbent spent $2 million. Jeff had raised somewhere around $350,000 at the time of the interview, and the point that was made in the interview in This American Life was that 10 years ago, $350,000 would have been an adequate amount of money, enough money to run a congressional campaign. But in this day and age, with the amount of money being dumped into campaigns, it was dwarfed by the amount that his opponents spent. Contrast that with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She spent just over $300,000, but she had a different scenario. She only had one opponent that she had to run against. And even though he had more money than God, he didn't run a very effective campaign, and she was able to out-hustle him. So that's the background on the Beals campaign. So, John, let's go ahead and show the video.
Well, that was fast. Hi, everybody. I can't cue it up that fast, my friend. But yes, we'll play that video in a second. And I just want to say hi. We're here. There's a lot of people in the audience. Betsy's also in chat. Thank you all for being here. We'll be engaging in chat and talking about this, answering questions after this. It's about 30 minutes. So just give me 1 second here, and I'll cue that up, Larry.
So just you really should listen to the This American Life show. I think they're about an hour long. All you do is Google This American Life, Jeff Beals, and it'll pull up the show that he was on. It's entitled, This is my party and I will run if I want to. So definitely go out and listen to the full interview, because it brings up a lot of issues that rarely get talked about.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things you're going to hear in here that we're seeing pushed everybody right now in social media is the terms resistance Dem versus progress Dem, and I think that's a very clear dividing line. Jeff is going to talk a lot about that and the challenges of running as a true progressive and the confusion in the field. So thank you all for being here. Here we go.
We're very excited today to have Jeff Beals join us, who was a candidate in New York in their primary for the Congressional District 19 nomination in the Democratic Party. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So Jeff had a tough race. I first found out about Jeff because he was featured on the June 22nd edition of This American Life on a show called It's My Party and I'll Try If I Want To, just to talk about the general parameters of the campaign that he faced. Unlike many of the races in New York, he had a number of opponents. Looks like he had about 7.
There were 7 total candidates.
Yeah, and so what that meant was the Democratic Party vote was split, and there was actually not a lot of difference between some of the results. It represents a district that is north of New York City and just skirts Albany over on the eastern side of the state. What was interesting was the amount of money that was spent, and that's really the theme that we're going to explore today is how progressive candidates deal with money. So the incumbent had raised, as of June 6th, almost $2 million. And the candidate who won had raised $2.2 million. Jeff, if I remember correctly, you raised around 350,000.
Yeah, a little less than that.
And the point that was made in the story was that 10 years ago, $350,000 would have been sufficient amounts of money to run a congressional campaign, but that's no longer the case. And then, of course, the most prominent race in the New York primary was Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who apparently spent just about the same amount you did or less, but she had no opponents. And the big difference she made in that campaign was that she outwalked her opponent and ran a grassroots campaign, which we find here to be fairly effective. And so she was able to defeat her opponent without having the vast amount of money that he did. So was this your first time running for public office, or had you done it before, Jeff?
Yeah, this was my first time running for office. I had a career in the government before it. I was a United States diplomat, a Foreign Service officer posted in the Middle East. And before that, I was an intelligence officer in the CIA under the Clinton administration. And now I'm a high school history teacher here in Woodstock, New York.
Did you have a lot of students helping you on your campaign?
I did have. We started with a small base of non-voting age students who were strong supporters of my campaign, but were way too young to cast a ballot. So we had to build from there, and we built it a big way. But as I said to a lot of our supporters gathered on election night, things were taking off, but you might say the runway wasn't long enough. But it was a great campaign.
So a big issue here on the West Coast is how do we approach money in politics, and how do you run an effective campaign without selling your soul? You actually encountered situations where people were trying to get you to change your values. Could you tell us about that and what that was like and what they were trying to get you to do?
Well, I believed from the start that Democrats shouldn't be losing races in red districts in the Midwest. They shouldn't be losing them in districts like mine in New York, which is a district that has been Republican for many straight terms, and that we lose them because we don't present a real contrast to what the Republicans stand for. We are too compromised ourselves by our corporate donors, and the people tend to look at both parties, see two compromised corporate parties, and figure one of them is going to cut my taxes and the other one's going to raise them. So I'll go with the cut. But if we stood up for a strong progressive platform that would really speak to the small towns of, in this case, New York, and in a wider case, America, that have been eviscerated by corporate power and income inequality and the rise of a ginormous financial sector, that we could win a lot more votes. So I put forward that platform because I believe in it. I need it. And it's obviously a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders advocated in his campaign that Elizabeth Warren stands up for. That right away will handcuff any person trying to raise a lot of money from the traditional Democratic donor base. No question about it.
And of course, your situation in New York is a bit different than ours because we don't have as many rich people as you do, being right next to New York City.
Well, yeah, that's true. And that's part of why so much money poured into this race in the Democratic primary. And I mean, look, one of the things that anybody that's running for office has to understand, that I would say I only half understood, and maybe now I'm 3/4, is that when you run for office as a progressive, you're agreeing to play a rigged game. The game is rigged because money is being allowed to control our races and influence them in enormous ways. And the contours of it amount to basically legalized bribery. It doesn't really pass the smell test, I think, for most Americans, that any money should come into a congressional race that isn't from the congressional district. But of course, there are no such laws like that in our country. You can, sitting where you are, contribute to my campaign. I can contribute to yours. And any hedge fund manager in New York City can dump enormous sums of money up into upstate New York in a race where they neither live nor have a vested interest. And so that alone is off and wrong. Then you have a problem of who will cut the type of checks that are required to really raise significant sums of money for a congressional campaign. We raised a lot of money off of grassroots fundraising, and I believed in it, and I continue to this day. But the simple fact is that the maximum contribution you can get is $5,400 from a couple, $2,700 from an individual. And the number of people in America that can cut checks like that and are willing to, that are not tax deductible, that are just money invested in politics, is vanishingly small. And most of the people that'll do it will do it only for a reason, as an investment in a business outcome that they want to see happen. So you're in trouble if you're advocating something that is a platform for the people and not necessarily for big business interests.
And you ended up in the middle, so your message resonated with at least a segment of the population. Did you have trouble convincing people that money in politics was bad, or do you think they have this fundamental understanding of what's going on, or do they not care?
Well, right away, right there, this isn't about money in politics. I understand is the subject that you want to talk about, and it's certainly at the heart of what's wrong with our political system. But money in politics isn't my campaign slogan. I do not think that most Americans wake up in the morning wondering about money in politics as an abstract issue. What they care about is Medicare for all. They care about whether or not we're going to take action to raise wages, to forgive student loan debt, to raise Social Security benefits. Are we going to stop endless war overseas, stop wasting trillions of tax dollars on that, and instead put it to work on something like a federal jobs guarantee that would raise wages and provide benefits to working people? That's what people care about. That's what I campaigned on. And the results were extraordinary. We were endorsed early on by the Justice Democrats, who are a national group of former Bernie Sanders staffers advocating positions like that. And what we noticed talking to them is that we have what's called a really high conversion rate. And a conversion rate means when you go to somebody at their door and you tell them your platform, they support it. A large percentage of them do, and they sign on to support your campaign. So the results of our election really wind up reflecting how many people we could get that message to, not people not responding to it. There was a tremendous response to it, but there was also a tremendous amount of money poured into the race to try to drown out that message and to try to elide the differences between progressive candidates and people that don't advocate progressive ideals but want to convince voters that they do. And that's part of what the subject of the podcast was. We had a really startling case of deceptive advertising going on in our district, financed by millions of dollars of corporate money to convince people that candidates who support something they would call it universal health care, are advocates of a national health program like Medicare for All. None of the candidates who said that were supporters of Medicare for All. The vast majority of the people in our district were supporters of Medicare for All and only wanted to vote for that. But they were deceived by a lot of glossy mailers and TV ads in which they were told, hey, vote for me and I'll give you universal, affordable health care for everybody. And they had a lot of trouble realizing that that was actually poll-tested corporate speak for the status quo and not for the elimination of the private health insurance industry and the establishment of a national health program.
Wow, interesting. And I haven't figured out how to deal with negative advertising in campaigns yet either. Did you try to combat that message, or did you just try to ignore it and try to overwhelm it with boots on the ground?
Well, we rallied a tremendous number of volunteers, and we tried. I was featured in that podcast and elsewhere in articles in Rolling Stone by Matt Taibbi because I didn't hesitate in what were largely stage-managed candidate forums to directly point out the deception in that kind of advertising and the nature of the campaigns that we were up against. But it's hard to get that message out to a lot of people, especially in a very large district like ours that comprises 4 different media markets, 7,900 square miles, almost 11 counties. That's tough. So the results that we saw were actually really great. If you can't tell it looking at the results there, but every campaign above us was over $1 million spent. We were outspent 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 6-to-1. The campaign that we're listed as being tied with was over a $1.5 million campaign. And we managed to rival and rally against these campaigns. But it's tough. It's tough to match that level of advertising. And it's tough when progressive groups and even progressive leaders are nervous about big money and nervous about realizing that you have to make campaigns winnable, not just wait until you assess via the money that they're quote unquote viable. You've got to take risks for it, and you got to step forward. And it really counts on each of us to say, is my politics going to be based on what I believe or not? So a lot of people did, but not enough. And we got pretty far. We didn't get all the way, but I would say we made a pretty good start.
Larry, I'd want to jump in. You did amazing considering. I mean, you've had Justice Democrats, which is good. I was going to ask if you had the endorsement of the 3 big groups, because Alexandria Ocasio had that. But the other thing is, how much do you think her media time, that debate with Crowley, affected the outcome there?
I'm sure that helped. Another thing that was going on here was a too large field. And so, you'll see a candidate down lower than me, a guy named David Clegg, was a deacon and a pastor here who had a progressive platform that unquestionably split the vote between us. And, there's nothing you can do other than try to convince the other guy you're going to wind up ahead of him and that he should team up with you. But it's hard to get people to do that. So you have to build your campaign, you have to build your base until you're strong enough to hold the banner yourself, which is what I did do. I had Justice Democrats. I was also working with People for Bernie, which is a national grassroots collective behind his campaign. They endorsed, as did the local Bernie-crat groups in a couple of different counties here.
Nice. Hey, Larry, just so you know, what he was talking about, the confusing language around healthcare, that's Jamie McLeod Skinner. That is her language. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's that deceptive. I'm trying to look progressive, but I'm not really.
Well, look, this whole thing about language is very, very important. Right now, we are facing the same thing that happens all the time when a new progressive movement is on the rise. And what you face is not people arguing against it, because I got news for you. We already won the argument. everybody knows that these are the winning positions in politics right now. But what happened in the 60s and what is happening now is people try to co-opt those movements, seize the surface elements of their language until you forget what the movement was. So you've got a group in the United States right now called End Citizens United. Have you heard about that PAC?
No.
Okay, well, that's a PAC, and you will see lots of candidates saying, I've been endorsed by End Citizens United, and I hereby pledge to not take 1 cent of corporate money for my campaign. Sounds great, doesn't it? That does not mean that the person running is a progressive Democrat or is not running essentially a corporate campaign. Why is that? Well, that's why I started off by saying that our election contribution rules right now are essentially legalized bribery. You can't get money directly from a corporation in the United States. That is illegal. IBM can't write you a check. Apple can't write you a check. However, the CEO can write you a personal check. All the members of a lobbying law firm can, as partners individually, write you personal checks. And you, as a candidate, can collect and bundle all of those checks from all of those corporate interests, from every managing director at Goldman Sachs, and then stand and give a speech and say, I have turned down every dime of corporate money, and I will not accept a cent of money from corporations, only from individuals. And most people, you know, God love them, are not going to know the difference. Why would they know the difference? So you actually have to look at the platform that somebody is running on. You can't listen or turn this into a money in politics debate, because there's 1,000 ways for people to disguise money in politics, or frankly, even make grassroots candidates sound like they are taking bribes too. I mean, all you have to do is look at anybody's list. I mean, I raised over $300,000. Go down it. Find whoever gave me $5,400. Go find out where they made their living, and then say, hey, Jeff took $5,400 from an executive. What does that mean? You know, where else was I going to get $5,400? A progressive executive who I found who supported my campaign. So none of this is really good for people to understanding how campaigns have to be run. I would start with the platform, make sure that the platform really is a progressive platform, and on that basis, try to figure out whether or not you're running a progressive campaign.
So if you were to do this again, what would you do differently?
I mean, I think we had a very unique and difficult situation here that was essentially tough from the start. Too many candidates. The vote was split among a couple of strong progressives, me and another candidate. That was part of the structure of what was going on here. And there was really very little way out of it. So the only thing you can do in a case like mine is, you know, build your base. By the end of the campaign, I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of not only volunteers, but contributors from all over the United States, because of both the press coverage, because of the message, because of my social media presence. It had all built, and it was there. And it was in place just in time for, the election day. So next time you have it starting on day one, and people know who you are. You know, it took a lot of time for people to even know who I was, for me to build up both my platform and for people to hear me speak. Those are things that I think a lot of candidates just have to know, and I reassure myself with, are things that you have to start somewhere. So start there. In my case, I had a lot of government experience, and I've been through this before. And I knew that I was hacking away at the root of so many things that I saw go wrong in my government career. And so it was invigorating to be fighting what I thought was the core of the problem. And the problem is, you're right, money in politics. And the way to fight it is grassroots energy. I wish there was an alternative. The one thing that I would want to happen, and I hope being on this show can happen, is that we forge wider ties among progressives across the United States who want to see this change happen. What I was trying to do was unique in a way. I was taking the Bernie Sanders model and applying it to a congressional race. But when you do the Bernie Sanders model nationally and you add up $27 across the United States, you can get to quite a substantial sum, especially with his notoriety and with his coverage. When you do it inside one congressional race and you're just starting, that's tough. That's tough to get those numbers to add up. But I think that they can. That's why what I'm doing now is working with a lot of activists that I joined with to continue in the form of a PAC that will help progressives running in red states across red districts across the United States, because that's where I think it's most important that we put this message forward and where it's going to make the biggest difference for the country.
Is your PAC national or is it East Coast regional?
It's going to be national. We're just forming it now, and we're working with groups that I'm already involved in helping, like Justice Democrats. You know, I think that we're at the start of a movement, and so you can't ask for it to already get there. But the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did win is encouraging, and you know, is the beginning of something huge. So look, you know, if you talked about a campaign like mine before the 2016 presidential primary, it wouldn't have even existed. And now here we are. So if you looked at how many Democrats in Congress support Medicare for All before, you would have thought really anybody did. Well, now you're up to about 121 Democrats that are co-sponsors to the bill. These are enormous strides in a short period of time. So if we can get there before our entire democracy collapses, that'll be pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, what you point out is really good to remember, that we're at the beginning and everyone wants instantaneous results. And even though the progress that's been made is amazing in the time that it's happened, everyone still wants it to happen faster.
Well, yeah, and I'll name you one other thing that's really important that I do propose that people start pushing for a little bit more. One of the real myths that was going on in the race that I was in here were people saying, and you could hear it in that podcast, oh, well, Jeff Beals is not raising enough money to compete in a congressional race, and you have to raise $2 million in order to face down the Republican incumbent. I was never disputing that. And that was a bit of deception being used by national Democratic leaders. The race against the Republican is only beginning right now after the primary. We were in a Democratic primary between Democrats. That was the race that I was raising money for. And what wound up happening in our race was that candidates who claimed that they were raising enormous sums of corporate money to face down the Republican spent all of it to suppress and defeat the progressive Democrats running in their flank in the primary. Now they're back to the same zero that I'm at, but they're just going to restart raising that money all over again to run in the general election. The Democratic Party might not be able to achieve campaign finance reform on a national level right now because of the Supreme Court, because of the structure of Congress and our government. But there is no reason that the Democratic Party can't more seriously advocate campaign finance reform within our party. Why are we allowing our primaries to be decided by big dollar donors? Why wouldn't we take action as a party to stand against that and let our primaries be true contests of ideas before we all enter into the understandably vaster arena of the general election where you got to pile up what you can? That's the lie that took place in the election I'm in. I even heard a little trace of it when you said, oh, well, you finished right there, you know, in the middle. You know, well, it looks like, you know, some people agreed with you. Don't look at the results now.
You're right.
There was $2 million spent by a candidate to achieve 22% of the vote. $2 million. Then you have a candidate like me who spent around $300,000 to achieve about 2,000 votes less, 13% of the vote. That was an enormous outlay of special interest and corporate money to prop up a campaign and try to leave in the shadows other campaigns. That was not a case of some massive public rallying to corporate politics. They're not like, they don't like it. They don't want it either. But how are they supposed to tell the difference? Nobody announces it that way. So we have to be bold, stand for what we're standing for, and try to demand that the Democratic Party actually practice what it preaches.
That is a really intriguing idea. Have you discussed this with the New York delegates to the DNC?
Well, there's going to be a lot of resistance to it. I know some of these people, and, I spoke with one of them on the phone the other day, and he just, a lot of them don't see a problem with the system as we have it right now. We're not entirely dealing with people that agree with us. There are a lot of people who, if you told them that we have catastrophic income inequality in America and a corporate takeover of our political system that has to be stopped before we slide entirely to oligarchy, they're going to look at you like you're a raving apocalyptic preacher. I don't see it that way. I happen to see a lot of merit in the writings of Thomas Frank and the political platform of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and I trace it back to Teddy Roosevelt, and I don't even see why these things have to be Democratic alone. But this is a fight. So we can argue it. I think we should stand for it, and I think a change could come.
Well, this has been fascinating, and you've actually given us some good ideas. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Jeff?
Well, I hope people will, follow, will keep following both my campaign and this cause on a larger level. They can sign on to our email at, it's still right now, bealsforcongress.com. We'll transition to another forum in the near future. They can find me on Facebook at Jeff Beals. They can find me on Twitter at Jeff Beals NY19. And we're going to keep building this. I will be back in my classroom in the fall, but I'll be also out in the streets here, and I'll be working with other Justice Democrats across the country until we win. And I think we've taken a big step forward towards doing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an honor and a delight to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Hope we can stay in touch.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
So, a lot of interesting ideas there. The one that he touched on towards the end was about the DNC delegates, and that the Democratic Party could actually put in rules internally on campaign spending, so we don't burn through all of our money just getting through the primary. There's a big third quarter meeting of the Democratic National Committee coming up in August. We have a meeting with our delegates at the third quarter State Central Committee in Oregon, and they want feedback on what to do. And so one of the things that we can talk to them about is, well, why don't you go to the DNC and pitch the idea of campaign spending limits in our primaries? So having been there, I know that it's not an easy thing to do. They don't give delegates an opportunity to participate in their meetings in a way that would be effective. It's the meetings are generally just a dog and pony show of going down through and having sub meetings, but nothing of any particular substance. And you would have to walk in with a very strong game plan and an army of people behind you in order to affect that kind of change. So that's one of the things that we can do in here in Oregon. I'd be wondering is there thoughts of people on the line on what we can do to change things around so that we can make our elections more democratic and fair?
I'll just jump in. I know Betsy's in the chat, and everybody's been talking about this. It's a fantastic interview, by the way. There's like 3, 4, 5, I don't know how many different little chunks I'm going to cut out of that where he just said some sound bites that were perfect. And it is an example that I'm seeing what happened to him. We're seeing happen all over the place. And it's nice that what you're doing, getting this message out, is really important, and the chat is saying that. So, good job. It was a fantastic interview, Larry.
The other thing he talked about was the negative advertising and the character assassination that goes on, and the co-opting of language, and that would probably be trickier to address. But again, like he pointed out, the Democratic Party could institute rules to prevent that sort of thing happening. What campaigns really should be is candidates presenting their ideas and the electorate educating themselves and picking the candidate that most represents their values to go on into the general election.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're agreeing that's what needs to happen in Oregon. I mean, for us to be able to cut through the BS here, we got to get rid of the resistance Dems, right? There's not that many, from what I understand, from what you've talked about here. And that's what we're working on right now, is identifying those that really aren't going to work towards progress and primarying them. We had the same problem here in Oregon with having, in many races, too many people, too many progressives and faux progressives running against each other and dividing the vote. Do you think we can fix that with the strategy sessions for 2020?
I don't know. I mean, I'm a huge fan of contested primaries. It's distressing to see 7 people in a primary, because we don't have runoff voting where people can indicate their second and third choices. And so we do get into situations where you end up splitting your vote, and you end up like the jungle primary a couple of years back in California, where it was a predominantly Democratic district, but the Democrats split the vote and a Republican ended up representing them, where before the jungle primary was instituted, you would not have had that situation. I don't know. They certainly talked about that in the second CD, where they had half dozen candidates running for the one seat. No one dropped out, even though I think anyone with a clear sense of what was going on could tell who the front runners were and who the ones were that just were not going to eke out a win. I mean, there is the concept of running to get your ideas floated, but I didn't see a lot of ideas presented during that campaign that differentiated the candidates. So why did we have so many candidates?
Yeah, and to me, the answer is because we didn't coordinate efforts. The bigger difference right now between resistance Dems and progressive Dems is the resistance Dems have been doing this a long time. They have control of the major apparatus of the Dem party, and they understand how to pick a message, even if it's no message, and stick with that no message. Right? And they all work together to support that. and we didn't talk to each other for 2018. And we have to have a unified plan of attack with champions that we choose together, or else we're wasting our efforts. Yeah.
Now we could have a sort of a preliminary primary where, if you do get another situation where you have 6 candidates, do something so that you can indicate to them who the lower third are, and at least get the lower third to drop out. Nothing is going to bring someone from the bottom of the list to the top of the list in the final months of a campaign. But, it is America, and anyone, it's their party and they can run if they want to, just like the title of the show said.
Well, yeah, and just, to that point, look at what happened with Stephen Jaffe, who was a decent candidate running against Pelosi, but then right at the end there, at least in terms of the primary, 2 new candidates showed up, and both of them excellent progressive candidates, but they completely disheveled the race. And I'm not saying that Jaffe would have won. There was also an establishment-y pick. I can't remember, somebody else in there. But the thing is that that kind of activity, 3 good progressives should all have been running for 3 different things and working together to support each other in those 3 different things. It's that kind of an effort we're going to need to do. And then we were talking about earlier, what do we do in the case of like Feinstein versus De Leon? Does that blue?
You mean where De Leon is co-opting the language?
De Leon appears to me, and I want to ask everybody in the audience right now. There's a lot of people talking. Hey, Dennis. Hey, Jeffrey. Hey, Marcus. Got our Germans. If you could vote, Germans. Over here, Adam Fishman says he's. Thank you, Adam, for thanking us for doing this. Adam's still going to work on Oregon, getting people to vote. He hasn't given up hope. Schulte, hey, how you doing? But anyway, question to you. Knowing that what happened in California just was it yesterday, Dianne Feinstein snubbed by the California Party. Both Larry and I were surprised that there was enough progressive power to do that. congratulations, California. And they endorsed DeLeon. But if y'all remember, DeLeon was the least progressive of the candidates running for that position. We interviewed 3 out of 4. I don't remember at this point. But, Hildebrand, Hartson, and David did probably the most work there. And now he's got a powerhouse of progressive, action that he can put with him. I don't know if he's taken that power and put it behind DeLeon for the sake of the movement. What would you do? What do you guys think of this guy? Because he has signed on to some progressive-y things that I understand, but he's also using that shiny mailer language, I think, for other stuff. Unless I don't know. Did he join on the Medicare for All bandwagon? I don't know. Maybe I'm behind my times. We need Laura Livengood to update us on it, California. But what do you guys think? Will that blue do? That's the question. I think the big problem here, Larry, is we have to look at every single one individually. It's painstaking.
And we should have a discussion on what to do about the co-opting of messages.
Yes.
And without, impinging on anyone's right to free speech, how do we keep the campaigns focused on ideas? I mean, one of the things we need to do is elect leadership of the Democratic Party who cares about this kind of thing. I have not seen any leader in the Democratic Party in the last 12 years who focused on that. The party tends to be very hands-off on this stuff, except when they want to, and except when they want to weigh in and put their thumb on the scale.
Right.
And then they're not.
Right. A lot like biblical God. I'm just going to stay uninvolved until I feel like it. Right. Adam Fishman says, we must get open primaries as the first change in Oregon. What do you think? Asking us. And you and I both agree with that. But we had some problems there passing that.
Yeah, and that's a decision that's made by the party. And so the party leadership that you Democrats elected defeated an attempt to open up the primary this year. So there was 2 attempts. There was one at the State Central Committee, and then there was an attempt to get a special meeting of the State Central Committee called so that we could consider it in time. A majority of the Democrats voted to open up the primary, but it took a 2/3 vote to be successful, and we were short on that. What was interesting is that I was cleaning up my attic last weekend, and I came across a newsletter from 1997 when I was secretary of the Multnomah County Democrats.
Wow.
And it was a 4-page newsletter that was actually printed on paper, and there was a whole big discussion about open primaries. So this has been going on for decades.
This is what resistance democracy gets you. Discussion of the same shit forever. It's really what we got to change. And I'm telling you, I know this is the wrong show to talk about, but a lot of you have heard me talk about this. We've got this strategy sessions on Wednesdays. We're starting to pull data sets and really figure out who these resistance Dems are, or actually some of them, like John Lively, just should be a Republican. He's our little mini Joe Manchin. But, this is what we have to do. Separate the wheat from the chaff and target them and get rid of them if we want to actually pass things in the Democratic Party. Because the plug seems to be at the top. Right?
At the top of a dark state. So, there's 2 components to this. There's the component that you see, which is the elected officers of the Democratic Party of Oregon, and that whole structure. And then there's the dark state going on in the background, which really does exist. We're not making this up. It's a coalition of organizations based in the Portland area that makes their own decisions about what candidates to support and where to pour money in and defeat locally supported candidates.
Yes.
That one I don't know what to do about either. We need to make the Democratic Party stronger so that we can ensure and do it with leadership so that we can ensure that we have a level playing field so that when the Democrats go to a primary election, they get a choice on the ballot and they get truthful information on who they're voting for so they can make an intelligent decision. That's the whole basis of the democracy. And until we have that, we're not going to get the right people elected, and we're going to continue having stupid things passed in Salem. prime example being the PERS debacle. Again, it is not the fault of the workers that have ended up with the situation that we have with PERS. It's a culmination of a number of bad decisions in the legislature that has resulted in a system that is eating the state services alive.
What is that, PERS? Explain that to me. I'm not familiar with it.
Well, the original deal was that if you forego wage increases, we will make a fabulous retirement program for you. And then they modified it a couple of times, and then they altered it to the point where they promised more than what they could give. And so the situation you have now is, you know, the legislature giving $300 million for education. Yay, everyone agrees we need more money in education. And then it turns out that actually the PERS in liabilities are going to increase by $500 million. So not only was the $300 million that you so courageously dumped into the education system eaten up, you now have a deficit of $200 million that you have to make up for, and that's going to come out of the existing infrastructure. And until someone comes up with a solution for this, it's going to continue to erode the educational system, which is already one of the bottom educational systems in the United States.
That's like what they did with Obamacare. Start off with a good idea, and when you're done, it's just a pile of shit that pisses everybody off. This is what happens with our what is it? You said, I don't know if it was you said it. No, it was Jeff. He says so many good things, but it's the difference between. Remember, you said it. The difference between policy written for corporations with policy written for people. And the policy, the people who want the individuals in our government that are backing corporations are like, you know, none of those people forward policies are going to work for us. Let's strip all of that out of there, and then you're good. You know,
and it's not even hidden. You hear it in the media all the time about the legislators going and meeting with the business community to get legislation passed. It's like, what the hell are you doing having those meetings? Why aren't you having meetings with the population who are the people that you serve to get the legislation correct? You know, the fear is that they're going to dump a bunch of money in it, but there is a way to handle this. And I don't know the secret sauce myself, but I think, you know, you have to have authentic campaigns, you have to talk about the issues, and you have to get in front of the voters so that they understand what they're voting on.
Yeah, and on that message, then back up into the chat here, the only response I saw about Hildebrand, other than who's, you know, he's still out there and actively working. I don't know what what he's campaigning for right now. I know he's an issues-based guy, but Brahm said no on De Leon, that he's a corporate tool. Well, is he as corporate tool as Feinstein? That's my question, right? It's just like, I will take Randy Bryce over, who is it, Ted Cruz? Is he running against? No. Who is it? No, he's running against Paul Ryan. I'll take Randy Bryce over Paul Ryan, but I'd probably prefer Kathy Myers because she's not taking DCCC cash, right? But Randy Bryce has all the money. Randy Bryce is a perfect example of the middle ground because he is being helped by our revolution and by the DCCC. And somehow he's managed to walk that tightrope. Right? And I'm all for him going into office because I don't like Paul Ryan. So I guess that blue will do. Right? But just Adam Fisher regarding co-opting messaging. Here's a good question: how do you determine universal health care private to Medicare for all public? This is what they've done, and they talked about it in an interview. They managed to confuse the terms, destroy the narrative, remove clarity, so that when you go knock on the door and you say your messaging, and then the corporate Democrat knocks on the door and their messaging sounds similar, and you really can't tell the difference, you're just going to vote. And that's what they do. They destroy the clarity of the message with these words, with the changing of the narrative. I'm confused as fuck. And just before I turn it back to Larry, this is why we tried to make single payer the litmus test. But even the progressive movement has backed off on the use of the term single payer because Republicans have turned it against us. Simply by saying single payer means the government's going to control whether you live and die.
I don't know if you saw the opinion piece in the New York Times, but they've started in now on Alexandra. They instead of a explanation like MSNBC did on what these socialist Democrats believe in, it was an all-out hit piece, making Alexandria sound like she was Stalin, and that she was going for flaming communism, and so that's what they're going to do. They're going to take her position as a socialist Democrat, and they're going to pervert it into something else so that people are afraid to vote for her.
Yep.
And they're going to lose in the end because they didn't put enough thought into how they're going to vote.
I don't know that they're going to lose because that's a pissed off place.
She might win because of the characteristics of her congressional district, but someone where things are a little bit more close might not be so fortunate.
Well, and true, and the characteristics of the douchebag she's running against. I mean, Crowley running third party now. It's unbelievable. The DNC is now just as bad as the GOP in terms of do what I say, not as I do. And then when they get caught doing what they said not to do, they're like, so what are you gonna do about it? And the answer is, and this is what Brom, to answer your question. No, John. We can't take De Leon because it's the slippery slope down. We don't have a choice. We get two choices we don't like there. Do I write in Jill Stein again? I don't know. It's really tough questions. Kendra says, yes, John, this is what is going on. The messages are getting so mixed up and confusing. Yes, and just to one more thing, everybody, if we don't invest in independent media, we're never going to beat the noise out of MSM. Okay, never going to beat the noise. And in great sadness, we've lost the last billionaire that we thought might save the world. Elon Musk turns out to be the top donor to a Republican PAC that is all about keeping the Republicans in power. Don't trust any of them.
Great.
The rich are all just going to taste really good. It tastes really good. Anyway.
Any final comments to wrap this up?
Let's see. What do we got coming up next? What do we got?
Well, this afternoon we have the exciting presentation on motions.
It is exciting.
This is the secret sauce to getting things done. So come back at 12:30 and see our presentation. It's in a sequence of tutorials on Robert's Rules of Order. If you'd show slide 7, really this is about knowing your rights and preventing things like the 2016 Nevada Convention from happening again. So we have now in the process of establishing a virtual group so that anyone with access to a computer can join us and study the principles of parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules of Order so that you can demand your rights in these meetings and you can not get screwed by the establishment. To do so, to join the group, just go to pdpo.org and join up there. We have all of the past videos stored at advancementofdemocracy.com. So if you'd like to see the past ones advancementofdemocracy.org. So if you'd like to see the ones that we've passed or recorded in the past, they're sitting out there. Plus, you can subscribe to all of the future ones that we're having, and we'll go through about October in these various aspects of parliamentary procedure. So today's edition is on handling motions, and that's how you get things done. John talked earlier about the Unity sessions that we're having on Wednesday evenings, so you're more than welcome to join us there. We have 60 members of the Oregon House. About 50 of them will be running for re-election in 2020. What we're doing is planning for the 2020 elections because for all intents and purposes, the elections this year are over. There's a few that are still contested, but we pretty much know who's going to be in our legislature come 2020. We need people in their districts to talk about who is representing them. We actually are finding out that people don't know who their constituents are. A great example being Janelle, the African-American legislator who was canvassing her district and got called by one of her constituents as someone prowling their neighborhood. So clearly they did not know they were being represented by a black woman in the Oregon legislature.
My guess is they're not going to give her their vote. You know, they're going to be looking for the white person running. And this is, yeah, that's part of the problem. This next coming strategy session, everybody, is going to be chock full of all sorts of really cool data that I've been working on and Larry's been working on. And we've got this great process where Larry gives me initial sets. I break them down into data we can understand and target people. And then Justin Bryce is turning them into these gorgeous maps that we can use to really figure out what's going on with strategy. So join us this Wednesday at 7 p.m. for that. I got a lot of exciting stuff to share with you about some resistance Dems we're going to get rid of.
And the end result is we're going to end up with a short list of positions where we then can go out and search for candidates and then make them viable candidates, and so they can run viable campaigns and actually give the voters a choice instead of situations like this last primary where most voters had no choice. They took the Democrat that was put in front of them.
Yes, yes. I have this golden vision this time that we literally just present to you, right, in a live stream. And now, running in CD2, blah, and then we show them, and it's like a D&D character with all their stats and their stamina and what they've got and the resources we built behind them. We're going to create champions. And this is what we're going to do. We got to start, we got to build it first, and then we will win. So that's going to be the goal there. There was one other.
The discussion this week is going to be on the I-5 corridor legislators from Portland down to Eugene. The next week, we're going to talk about the Senate candidates that are up for election. There will be 15 of those. And then the following week, we'll talk about the other positions, including the U.S. representatives, talk about who we have. They run every 2 years. And so, of course, all the ones we have now will probably be running again in 2020.
Yep. And Senate Dems, or Senate up for running, there's 15 of them. But there's only 4 that actually need to be looked at on the Dem side. See, this is where it's really cool. Larry, is there anything else we got going on we need to talk about here?
Nope. Just remember that August 28th is the last day to file. We need candidates to run in local races, and the ballots on the race in this fall, in addition to the legislatures, are a lot of municipal councils. So this is how we build our bench. It is very difficult finding a candidate to run for state senator when you have a bunch of potential candidates who have never held public office. So what we need to do is build our bench. They did a survey inside the Democratic Party of Oregon a couple of years ago. There's around 3,000 elected positions in Oregon in total. 2,000 of them at that point in time were held by Republicans, and I don't think it's changed that much since then. Wow. So for all of our self-promotion as being a blue liberal state, when you get down to who's really running things, it's really being run by Republicans.
Wow, that's frightening. That's frightening. Real quick, Adam Fishman, thank you for joining us today. We don't have time. We're out of time. The show's over, and we're going to run a song here and get out of here. Next Sunday, 10 a.m., and if you want to talk to us about doing other things or getting involved, info@uphillmedia.org. Larry's a volunteer. We're all volunteers. And it takes an awesome crew of people to get this done. And I appreciate you being in here and talking to us. That's it. We can get out of here with, Mike McCabe. Thank you, Marcus. Tomorrow night, we have We the People returns. And it's the amazing, incredible Mike McCabe, who's running for governor of Wisconsin. And just his video has more activity on it. His We the People has more activity on it than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He's just off the charts. So he said some amazing things. Go back and watch it, and we're going to have him on again tomorrow and just hear what's going on with his campaign, because he's a progressive and he's really kicking butt out there in Wisconsin. So join us for that. We're going out with something I thought was fitting. We always go out with a song on this program, on all of the shows on Uphill Media, and this is from the Last Poets. It's spoken word. It kind of reminds me of Gil, Scott Heron. Seems about the same time era, but this is a pretty harsh message in here about the revolution, and I think it fits a lot of us. And it's a pretty interesting statement. So, thank you, Larry. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
When the revolution comes. When the revolution comes. When the revolution comes. comes. When the revolution comes, some of us will probably catch it on TV with chicken hanging from our mouths. You'll know it's revolution because there won't be no commercial. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, preacher pimps are gonna split the scene with the communion wine stuck in their back pockets. Faggots won't be so funny then, and all the junkies will quit their nod and wake up when the revolution comes. When the revolution comes, transit cops will be crushed by the trains after losing their guns, and blood will run through the streets of Harlem, drowning anything without substance. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, I hope pearly white teeth fall off the mouths that speak of revolution without reference. The course of revolution is 360 degrees. Understand the cycle that never ends. Understand the beginning to be the end, and nothing is in between but space and time that I make or you make to relate or not to relate to the world outside my mind, your mind. Speak not of revolution until you are willing to eat rats to survive. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, guns and rifles will be taking the place of poems and essays. Black cultural centers will be fought, supplying the revolutionaries with food and arms. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, white death will fall off the walls of museums and churches, breaking the lie that enslaved our mothers. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, Jesus Christ is going to be standing on the corner of Lenox Avenue and 125th Street, trying to catch the first gypsy cab out of Harlem. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, Jew merchants will give away matzo balls and gefilte fish to anyone they see with an afro. Frank Shippen will give away the Apollo to the first person he sees wearing a blue dashiki. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, afros are gonna be trying to straighten their heads, and straighten heads are gonna be trying to wear afros. When the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, when the revolution comes, when the revolution comes. But until then, you know and I know niggas will party and bullshit and party and bullshit and party and bullshit and party and bullshit and party. Some might even die before the revolution comes.